Okay, so most of you probably know who I am. You probably received emails from me, but I'm Sarah Nevison, and I'm going to be talking about a new model that I have helped create with some co-authors to age live swift foxes. I will also say that we are going to be talking about teeth, and we're going to be talking about teeth extraction. So if that just gives you the heebie-jeebies, you might not want to watch this session. Also, there are going to be photos of dead foxes in this talk, but all the foxes are just of their mouths. So if either of those two things make you a little uncomfortable, you might not want to watch. So again, I'm Sarah Nevison. I am the legacy biologist for Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. I'm originally from Minnesota, and that's where I got my undergraduate degree. And then I got my master's degree at South Dakota State University. A little bit of background on swift foxes. So the swift fox, or Vulpes velox, is a very small fox. They only weigh about 5 pounds, which is about the size of a house cat, but they weigh a lot less. A very skinny, tall, lanky house cat. I have a cat, she's pretty small, and she weighs 8 pounds, so they're even smaller than that. They do have a black-tipped tail, and that differentiates them between a red fox, which has a white-tipped tail, and they are an endangered species in the state of Nebraska. So they are a Tier 1 at-risk species on the Nebraska Natural Legacy Project. Swift foxes are omnivores. They'll pretty much eat anything. Their favorites are probably birds and prairie dogs or rabbits, but they'll also eat mice, grasshoppers, fruit, grasses have been seen in their diet as well. They are crepuscular or nocturnal, so we're seeing them active at dusk and dawn or at night. They live in dens underground year-round, and they live in family groups. So it's usually mom, dad, and pups of the year, but sometimes there might be another adult helper in the den. So a little background on the species. Their historic range is on the map in green, and it ranged pretty much all of the short and mixed grass prairie of the Great Plains. So all the way from Canada, all the way down to Texas. They were nearly extirpated from most all of their range by the early 1900s. Most of that was unintentional. The poisoning was usually geared toward larger species. Same with the trapping. Most people weren't actively trying to trap a swift fox. And then a big factor was habitat conversion. So converting their short or mixed grass prairie into agriculture or urban development. Currently, their distribution is about half of what their historic range was, and that is what's shown in the dark shaded counties. Granted, this map is the most recent we have for their entire range, but it is from 2009, so it is about 10 years old. And there have been multiple projects really across the entire continent looking at this species. Very briefly, I will say that there was research done in Nebraska by graduate student Lucia Corral. She set up trail cameras looking to document presence, and then she was able to use the data from those trail cameras to create a model. These are the locations where she put out all of her trail cameras. So you can see based on that little inset map that we're looking at the panhandle of Nebraska. So she set out over 900 cameras over the course of 3 years. The information she was then able to collect on presence of swift foxes, she was able to create this really great model, which is helping us understand swift fox occupancy. So we know that in Nebraska, they're most likely to occupy the short grass prairie near Chadron, so Oglala National Grassland, and also around Agate. Perhaps they could kind of be in around the Scotts Bluff area, and we do see some every once in a while down in that southwest corner of Nebraska, so down here. But her research was really able to help us just better understand where these foxes were. She also did some genetic research, and what was cool is she was able to look at these sort of distinct genetic populations across the majority of the Great Plains. And what's cool here is that she was able to see there was a group right at the northwestern tip of Nebraska that really probably goes into South Dakota. And it is widely accepted by swift fox biologists that this is all one population. We do have swift foxes in this very southwestern tip of South Dakota. So jumping into my research, so this is what I was doing for graduate school in South Dakota. I was studying the population at Badlands National Park in southwestern South Dakota. This population of swift foxes was reintroduced from 2003 until 2006. They had 3 different graduate students looking at this reintroduction and also trying to assess the viability of it. Genetically, they said that this reintroduction was successful. They had a lot of high heterozygosity, but the actual viability of the species long-term was leading toward extirpation. They just weren't surviving long enough. So that, coupled with the plague epizootic that came in 2008, we had some bad news. So plague, or Yersinia pestis, is transmitted by fleas, and it causes drastic declines in prairie dog populations. That matters because swift foxes eat prairie dogs. It's a main source of their food, and it also provides really good habitat for them. So then I came in from 2014 to 2016 to reassess this population and see how they were doing. Part of that work involved trapping, handling, and aging of these foxes. So the way we used to age swift foxes was looking at their teeth. So the pup on top, we would say that's a pup, or less than 1 year old. They have bright white teeth that are sharp, and the fox on the bottom, they have staining, dull broken teeth, so that's an adult. And that's about as distinct as we could get, was between pup and adult. We could also look at their pelage. So the top photo, again, that is a pup. It's a lot more yellow. Overall, the body's a lot thinner, the tail is a lot thinner, and that compared to an adult, which is on the bottom, they have longer fur, more gray fur, and more of like a puffy tail. We also believed that swift foxes only lived to be about 4 years in the wild. So then this happened. Right off the bat in June of 2014, I trapped this fox, and this fox was previously pit tagged from the graduate students before me, and it was 5 years old. And I was just like, wow, this fox is so old. This is so cool. Look at those teeth. And then a month later, I trapped another really old fox, again, previously pit tagged as a pup, and this fox was 7 years old. And I really had to sit on this for a minute thinking, we thought they only lived to be about 4. And here I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old in my population. So I told my advisor that this was really cool. We needed to do something with this. And he's like, well, that's great, but that's outside of the scope of your thesis. So don't do too much with that right now. So all I could really do was take a bunch of pictures. So anytime we trapped a fox, I would take pictures of their dentition, looking right at the front of their mouth, as well as the side or labial view. I would do this for any live fox that I found, and also for any dead fox carcasses that we came upon. I started to do a little research into aging of swift foxes, and I came upon a paper that said you can age swift foxes using tooth sectioning and cementum annuli layer analysis. But the authors of this paper said there were limitations to this. Number 1, the animal has to be dead. So cementum annuli analysis, which I will show on the next slide, you have to remove a canine tooth, and you can't remove a canine tooth from a live swift fox and expect them to do well in the wild. Also, this was really expensive. Depending on how many samples you were going to be sending off, it could be really expensive to try to age your population. And then it took weeks or months to actually get these results back. So this is what cementum aging is. Teeth are removed and then they are sent into a lab. The teeth are sliced and dyed, like you see on the photo on the top right, and then they're looked at under a microscope. When you look at them under a microscope, you see the bottom picture. You can see these dark rings, or the annulus, and that is formed in the winter. And then you can see light bands, that's the cementum, and that's formed in the summer. And you can literally read it like tree rings. So the photo there shows a tooth section of a 4-year-old black bear, and you can literally count 1, 2, 3, 4 clear, distinct lines on that tooth. So while I did a little more research, I saw that some people were using cementum layers to age wolves, and they expanded on that research and said they could use just tooth wear, and they could look at, as those teeth wore down, they could get a good estimate of how old this fox was. I also saw that that's kind of how we age mountain lions. A guide put out by Anderson and Lindsay in 2000 is the main guide lots of researchers use to age mountain lions, and it's mostly based on their teeth. So in 2016, when I was done with a lot of my research, I wrote a grant and I got funded from Dakota Zoo Conservation Fund. That is the zoo in Bismarck, North Dakota. And I got this small grant to photograph all my foxes, extract the teeth from dead foxes, send those off to a lab, and then I was going to compare the photos that I had taken pre-extraction, look at all of the teeth, and see if I could actually make a model just based on tooth wear, once I knew how old they actually were based on the cementum annuli analysis. So I was starting to actively seek out swift fox carcasses, and I hit the jackpot twice, because both South Dakota State University and Badlands National Park had a chest freezer full of dead swift fox carcasses just for me to look at. So I was ecstatic. We also were able to collect foxes from the Game Fish and Parks and also from the US Forest Service. And by the end of kind of putting my call out to try to find foxes, I had 58 total carcasses. Some of them had been in the freezer since 2009 and some were really fresh. This is where the swift fox carcasses came from. So we had some from kind of a northwest population in the state, a few from the southwest population in the state. Again, this is the one that we know is pretty much the same population and goes into Nebraska as well. And then this was the Badlands population that I was studying. We had 30 different carcasses come from that area. So my methods to develop this guide were to thaw out all 58 foxes, take really clear high resolution photographs. So we're peeling away the lips, really trying to get a good look at those teeth. We were looking at it from the front and also from the side. Once we had these really high quality photos, we'd then extract the teeth, and then we sent them off to Matson's lab in Montana. We ended up sending 48 teeth. And if you remember, we collected 58, but 10 of them were really obviously pups. Actually, 22 of them were really obviously pups, either based on their pelage or the fact that we collared them and we knew, or cases like this where we actually could see an adult canine coming in on top of a puppy canine. So we knew that fox was a pup. And we already had 22 of them, and we didn't want to spend all of the money to get ones that we knew were pups tested. So we sent 48 away. Briefly, this is how you extract a tooth. So you use a dental elevator, you slide it up into the skull, and surprisingly, canine teeth are about as long through the jaw as they are actually back up into the jaw. So you really have to carefully work that dental elevator in there and make sure you preserve the tip, which is what I had circled, because that's actually what they slice, and that is where they look for the cementum annuli analysis. So we got our results back from our 48 foxes. Unfortunately, they could only analyze 46 of them. We did break 2 of the tips on them. And this is what we got back. So we found that these foxes ranged in age from 0 all the way up to 9. So once I had those results, I then was able to go back to all those photos that I took. I had taken 616 photos. 46 of them were from carcasses that I had been able to salvage, and 14 were from live foxes. So again, I was taking photos of all of our live foxes when we trapped them. And what was really cool is multiple foxes we had trapped at one age class, and then 2 or 3 years later, the fox died. And now we had a photo of the dead dentition as well. So this actually then counted as 2 different data points. We knew how old the fox was when it died because we sent it off for lab analysis. And then we can actually backdate it and know that when we trapped it, it was a younger age, and we can use that photo as well. So I looked at all of these photos and I tried to start to differentiate between age classes. Very briefly, we are going to talk about dentition. So the dental formula of a swift fox says they have 3 incisors on top, 1 canine, 4 premolars, and 2 molars. I would look at both that labial photograph on the side, but we weren't able to find very many characteristics that were indicative showing different age classes. The side just wasn't as good as the front. Once we started to look really closely at these front photos, and I'll zoom in on it, we could see a lot of unique characteristics that really helped differentiate between ages. So this is how we, the dental formula looking directly at the fox, we have incisor 3, incisor 2, incisor 1, and then incisor 1, incisor 2, incisor 3. And this is where we were really able to tell the differences. So medial and lateral lobes. Just briefly, those are the tiny little notches you can see on the inside of the teeth. The lateral lobes are on the outside of the teeth. And my technician and I just started to call these mittens. If you look at those teeth, it kind of looks like those tiny little notches form cute little winter mittens, and that's what we started to refer to. The other thing we noticed that was really indicative was the length of the I3, so that 3rd incisor right before the canine, and then just the overall wear on the bottom teeth. So this is a pup, their teeth are very loby, and as they age, they start to really flatten out. So I am
up, Sarah, you have 3 minutes.
Perfect. I am going to show you what they looked like, but I'm just going to go very quickly through these. These are all pups. And again, we have very noticeable mittens. You can really see, especially in the top photos, that you can see those tiny little ridges on the teeth, as well as the length of the I3. It's very long, and that is the difference between a pup and a 1-year-old. For 1-year-olds, the I3 is now the same length as the rest of the incisors, but they probably still kind of have some mittens on their other teeth. Moving up to age 2, we have really flat teeth. We're starting to lose our lobes, but there's definitely a lobe on the lateral side of the I2. For age 3, we start to see some spacing between the teeth, and we start to see the dentin. That's on the lower teeth. We start to see these sort of tree rings. Similar to age 4, there's coloration. There's coloration on the premolars and the canines. And again, really visible dentin showing on the bottom teeth. We had to group age classes 5 and 6 together. It was just undiscernible, the differences between the two. We have really hard wear on these incisors. And look at those I3s. They are almost worn all the way down to the gum. And all of them have really clear dentition. You can really see how that almost looks like a tree stump on the bottom of their mouth. And then the last one was age class 7+. So we had 2 7-year-olds and 1 9-year-old. We just lumped them together and said, if you're 7 or older, this is probably what you look like. And all teeth are very worn down, very small, very spaced apart. And these canines are worn up to 50% of their normal length. So when that fox would actually close its jaw, the lower canines barely even touched the upper jaw, and the upper canines barely even touched the lower jaw, while on a pup, they extend way down below the jaw. This also shows something interesting that happens to the dead foxes. So the gum lines start to recede. You can see here is really where the gum line would be on a live fox, but this is where the gum line has receded to. So it is something you have to take into consideration if you're looking at dead foxes. So briefly, just to kind of show it all on one slide, this is a pup, 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3, 4, 5 or 6, and then 7+. So prior to actually having a guide and really looking at these foxes, if we had trapped this fox, we would have said, yep, that's probably an adult and it's probably 1-year-old or so. But we would have said the same thing about this fox. We would have looked at this fox, which is actually 9 years old in reality, and said, boy, they have a lot of wear, but it's probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 years old, because we really just didn't know. But the difference of a 1 to 2-year-old fox, their longevity, perhaps the effect that they can have on a population is drastically different than the effect a 9-year-old could have on a population. All right, and I'll be wrapping up with just a few discussion slides. So when we originally sent these off, we would have said we had about 21 pups and 25 adult, and just broadly said adult. when in reality, those adults spanned age classes from 1 all the way up to 9 years old, really changing the way you would think about this population. We previously thought they only lived to be about 4, and 15% of our foxes were 4 or older, including a 9-year-old. The 9-year-old was a male, and he was the oldest fox. Oh, there we go. He was the oldest fox we had. The oldest female we had was 5 years old, and both of those foxes did produce successful litters in the year that they died. So we are not seeing reproductive senescence at either of those ages. Okay, so to bring it all home, why does this matter? How would we even try to use this? I truly believe that being able to better understand the population structure can lead to better management, especially for small at-risk populations like the population in Nebraska, which is endangered, and the population in South Dakota, which is threatened. Not only would it be really helpful to understand those population dynamics, but also really helpful for harvested populations. So you can actually legally harvest for fur swift foxes in Colorado and Kansas. So I think it could be very helpful for those managers to also see what types of foxes are being harvested. Also for reintroductions. So reintroductions are still being occurring on the landscape. I'm just going to show you where all of the reintroductions have occurred. It's always been in the northern part of their ranges. And the most recent one is this one here. Fort Belknap actually just started a reintroduction this year in 2020. So there are a few limitations to this. It is validated. We are going to be testing some biologists and make sure that it actually does work. It will require a little bit of training to understand. Some of our age classes are only defined by one individual, but I will say that the Wolf paper I had cited had 5 different age classes, all only represented by one individual. And perhaps there's diet changes, and the way teeth would wear in Canada are different than they would wear in Texas. But again, the Wolf paper that I had read said they didn't notice that in gray wolves. All of that being said, I really think the benefits outweigh the risks or outweigh these limitations, because you can actually age them pretty darn accurately alive. And we used to not be able to do that. You used to have to take a tooth, and you could only do that on a dead animal. It's really quick, it's free, and it's going to understand our understanding of population dynamics. So I see that I am out of time. I was going to tell you how to take great photos, but there's a great photo. That's how you want to take it. And I will just end with saying thank you, particularly to the funding source, which was Dakota Zoo. I did this sort of under the umbrella of my graduate work at SDSU. That was funded through the USGS. And then I also want to thank South Dakota Game Fish and Parks, the Forest Service, and the National Park Service for helping collect foxes. If you ever see a swift fox in Nebraska, we definitely want to know. They are an endangered species, so be sure to let us know if you ever see one. And that's where I'll end.